Welcome to HyeRoots, Descendants of Ararat. I am Georgia Jain, your host for this episode of the first series devoted to Armenian genealogy. With each new episode of HyeRoots, we will explore different resources that will aid those wishing to learn more about their Armenian family history. Today, I am joined in the studio with Meline Haratunian. Meline has been working on an interesting book project about her family for a number of years, and I felt others would benefit greatly from her experiences. Welcome, Meline.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Good. I'm doing well, thank you.
That's good. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family, where you came from, and what got you started on this project?
Well, it basically evolved over time. I was always interested in my family genealogy, but as a child, I think I was just focusing on my direct ancestors. I think like a lot of people in my generation, my grandparents were reluctant to talk about their experiences, and so I don't know if it was a combination of being so young and not asking the right questions, or their reluctance to talk about the horrors that they had witnessed. It was very rudimentary. As I got older, I started to broaden my inquiry and was pulling in, asking a lot more detailed questions, and a lot of that information allowed me to put together a much more extensive family tree that then I used as kind of the skeleton on which to add skin and muscles from my research, but I had something to start with.
Yeah, so maybe just talk a little bit about your grandparents, what you remember about them. And
I'm going to focus on my paternal grandparents because that's who I'm writing the book about. My grandparents were my memories, childhood memories of them, they were very jolly. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of teasing. There were moments, even as a child, that I could see that they were just soaking it in when they were around their grandchildren. We were noisy, we were rambunctious, we were, kind of typical American kids, and they just adored us, that unconditional love. And certainly as a parent now, I so appreciate the love that they instilled in us. And in doing the research, when I was able to kind of uncover their childhood and how starkly different it was from mine, it really made me appreciate the warmth and love that they gave us, even though, in a lot of circumstances, they didn't have that growing up.
what was your initial expectations when you started the project? What were you hoping to achieve?
Yeah.
Going into the project, what were you looking at?
I see these stories that other people tell, and I was like, well, that's not our family. We don't have anything. We don't have any stories to tell. We don't have any artifacts. We just, we're just a regular Armenian American family, and most of it's been lost to history. So I took what I had, and initially, the genesis was I reached out to Heirlooms. He was in Watertown talking about the Houshamadyan project, and over the years I have collected various Armenian artifacts, and I invited him when he was in Watertown to come and look at these artifacts. He was not interested in the artifacts that I had bought on eBay, but he was like, does your family have any? And I was like, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, there's this two rugs that my great aunt made. There's this copper bowl that was used to bathe my great uncle when they came over to the United States. And then from there, I wrote an article as an ODA component of Houshamadyan. And I started to kind of tell the narrative of all four of my grandparents based on what I knew. I incorporated pictures, I included some of the artifacts, but then I realized there's a story here that I could build on, and that was the genesis of the book.
So Houshamadyan.org is a website devoted to the life experiences of Armenians who were living within the Ottoman Empire. So it's a great resource for people that are looking for information. They've really built out that website. It's organized by region, so you can look in, and it gets into demographics, it gets into culture, it gets into the games they played, other aspects, and family stories and photographs. So it's a really great resource. They've done a wonderful job. So once you started the project and you learned more about what there was to learn, you also decided to take a few research trips to augment what you were finding, right?
Right.
And I think the first one was to Greece, maybe,
Right.
and you were there. And the reason, not the reason necessarily for going there, but while you were there, you realized, you could visit the place where your grandmother was in an orphanage. Is that
Exactly.
correct? Well,
Yes.
maybe tell us a little bit about that, and then maybe what it was like for you to be there.
Sure. So our family knew that my grandmother was in an orphanage in Greece, and we had a photograph that she had of the orphanage, but we had no idea where the orphanage was, what the name of it was. I assumed it was Near East Relief, but did not know. And ironically enough, I lived in Greece in high school, and we still didn't know where it was. So I never had any opportunity when I lived there to do any research. And I happened to be watching, I think it was Orphans of the Genocide, that movie. And, I'm in a dark theater with my family, we're watching the movie, and he starts interviewing this man from Australia. And the man's talking about his mother, and they flash a picture of my grandmother's orphanage, and it says Oropos, Greece. So then I have something to work with. In the theater, I've got my phone, I'm writing down, Oropos. So I started to research it, and there's a treasure trove of photos and information that Near East Relief wrote about that particular orphanage. Project Save has maybe 30 photos of somebody went there and they took pictures of the staff, they took pictures of the buildings, they took pictures of the orphans themselves. They're not very high quality, but it did give me some insight. So now fast forward, I was going to vacation in Greece. We had a layover in Athens for a couple of days, and I was like, you know what, I have no idea if the building's still standing. I have no idea really anything. I just know the town, and I have a picture. So I was with a friend who speaks Greek. We hopped on a bus. We, went 45 minutes north of Athens to Oropos. And I was like, look, let's not spend too much time. We'll find the oldest person we can. We'll show them the picture, and if we spend an hour or so and we can't find anything, we'll just get on the bus and go back home. So we found, the oldest person we could find was our age. And when I showed her the picture, she immediately said, oh yeah, she goes, the building's still standing and it's around the corner. And she quickly looked up some information online. It had been used as a prison after the orphans aged out. The Nazis had occupied Greece, and they used it as a prison, and so now it's a music school. And anyway, so we walk over to the building, and it's a compound, and it was just like they described it. It had not changed much at all. And what surprised me was I had a picture of the building from a hill that somebody had taken. What I didn't realize was the building is right on the water, and it overlooks, so all of the orphans, their dormitory buildings had this gorgeous view of the Mediterranean, which really made me feel a lot better about my grandmother's, at least one of her orphanage experiences was just so lovely. So they gave us a tour. There were different buildings, and I had done enough research so I could identify what was the kitchen. There were wells that were still from that time. There were shutters that were from that era. The building had not really been, it was maintained, but I don't think they had changed it much. So I got to walk where, she was living, where she was being trained in vocational skills, and she was with fellow Armenian and Greek orphans.
Interesting. So, of course, last summer, we also followed that trip up with a trip of our own. We traveled to Western Armenia, to the places where your family came from, together with a group of our friends. So maybe we can talk a little bit about those two places that we went to in that trip.
Sure, I'd love to talk about that. So so both of my father's parents were from the same little village in Sapasja called Kaidod. Kaidod was near Zara. I had, thanks to you, you helped me find the geographic coordinates of it, because there were very few maps that included such a small village, and those that did were showing it in different locations. So you kindly were able to help me with military maps and other maps that I didn't have access to that had the level of detail that would have identified that village. We also found the Turkish name of that village, which also helped.
This is one of those interesting cases where the Turkish village name was actually in use even before the genocide.
Exactly.
This is not a name change that happened afterwards. It was also known as Tashlak.
Right.
And so that name was used even in the early 1800s.
Exactly.
It was being used, both names are being used.
Right. And I think what I learned was my grandparents, they would speak so lovingly of their village, Kaidod. You know, the air was sweet. It was such a wonderful life that they had. They made it sound like our ancestors had been there for millennia. And in my research, I found that no, the Armenians populated that village starting in the early 1800s. The Armenians that populated that village were originally from Kars. And during the First Turco-Russian War, a group of them came to this location that was Kaidod, became Kaidod, and they populated that for maybe about 100 years, and then the genocide happened and then wiped them all out. What I was able to I took the coordinates that you gave me before the trip and looked on Google Earth and Google Maps to kind of see where the village was in relation to Zara, which is the biggest town that still exists, where it is in relation to Sivas, which is the biggest city that still exists, and then also where it was in relation to neighboring Armenian towns that are mentioned in various narratives about the village. Then I looked at Google Earth and really zoomed in, and I could see that there's virtually nothing left. In like Arakalis, which is an adjacent Armenian village, you can see the stone foundations of the buildings, even though the buildings don't still exist. In Kaidod, there was nothing. So my expectation going on the trip was that there was literally going to be nothing to see. One of the survivors from that village had written a short narrative about the village, and he said that immediately after the genocide he had gone back to the village and everything was destroyed. There had been a church there. He described where the church had been. It was on a large hill. And then immediately below the church was a school, but both the school and the church had been destroyed. And then the houses were just below the church and the school. When we went, there were 3 structures that were somehow connected to the Armenians' time there. The most significant one, at least to me, was what is now a home, appeared to have been built on the foundation, and possibly the dimensions. It was the same orientation as a church, and it had the same geographic coordinates of what was known to be where the church was. So we could kind of see, the outline, if you will, of what had been the church. There was a building immediately below that. The Kurdish gentleman that was showing us around, he said that both of those buildings had been built with the stones from the church and from the school. But the church appeared to have been, almost exactly what one of the houses were, and then the other building was a church. And then you were exploring, and you found kind of the remnants of a house. It was, some of the walls were still intact. There was no roof. Some of the walls were missing, but you could see the outline of a house. It was a 2-room house, and that was consistent with the research that I had found in reading various Houshamadyan books about Sebastia more generally. And photographs that I had found from Germans and Swiss who were in that area, that seemed to correlate to the research that I had found.
Yeah, as I recall, we also went to where the cemetery had been, right?
And that was the other thing. I
Right.
had no idea that the cemetery still existed. There was no mention of that anywhere. There was no mention that there had even been a cemetery. And the gentleman that was showing us around pointed to a hill that you could see from the where the church had been, and they were facing each other. And on that hill, there were stones that appeared to mark where graves had been, but there were no writings or inscriptions on that. But to walk where my ancestors surely were buried was an incredibly moving experience for me, and something, it's the top of my bucket list to be able to go to the village in the first place, to walk where they walked, but also to pay my respects personally to my ancestors was something I'll never forget. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it is meaningful when you can walk the steps and the geography that they talked about, and you can envision it, and it matches what they described very well. And then we were fortunate too. We met some people that were very friendly to us. They were very helpful.
Exactly.
You don't always get that, but in this case, we did. We also tried to find one of the orphanages. Your grandmother had been in an orphanage even earlier than the genocide, and we tried to locate that location as well. We actually spent some time trying to do that, walking around, right?
Less successfully, but yes.
Yeah.
So my grandmother, her parents died in 1909 of typhus, and there may have been other siblings. They probably died as well. The only survivors were her and an older brother, and it's a little vague as to why, but none of her extended family could take them in. And she and her brother were sent to Sivas, which was at least a day's journey away, but it was the largest city nearby. And there was a Swiss orphanage there. That orphanage had been started with money that was raised following the Houshamadyan massacres in 1895 and 1896. At the point that my grandmother and her brother arrived at the orphanage, they were starting actually to wind down the orphanage. They were running out of money. The orphans were aging out. And fortuitous for my grandmother and her brother, because of the 1909 massacres in Adana, there was a new wave of funding just before she got there. So they took her in. There's a photograph actually that I have of the girls in that orphanage. It's blurry, it's not great. They're all older girls, probably from the Houshamadyan massacres. There's a little girl who's 3 years old, or about 3 years old, which is what my grandma would have been, sitting on the railing of the balcony. And that, if that is her, we don't know. That would be the oldest picture we have of my grandmother.
Wow.
So that Swiss orphanage was around, obviously before the genocide. Their compound was adjacent to the American mission. And there was a lot of kind of cross-fertilization between the Swiss and the Americans. The Americans were missionaries. They were both Protestant missionaries. And there was a lot of joint activity that the adults in those two orphanages provided for one another. So what we were looking for was, we took the Heirlooms map, and we were trying to locate the compound there was a location for the Swiss orphanage. We couldn't really find anything there, but we found the block, and then immediately across the street was where the American mission was. Again, it did not appear to be any original buildings. What was especially meaningful for me, was to walk where my grandmother had walked and had spent, her formative childhood years. The building that she was lived in during the genocide, so she was there before the genocide. When the genocide started in Sivas, it's a long story, but her orphanage was the only Armenian entity in the entire city of Sivas that was allowed to remain intact during the genocide. And they were housed in what was called the Teachers College in the American mission. And when we were walking in that block where we found the American mission, there's now a playground, and it's called College Park. And that was probably where the Teachers College had been. That was where, if it was, that was where my grandmother had been housed during the genocide.
Yeah, we used the existing street names and the street names that existed at the same time back then, and that's how we triangulated the locations of where things were. And I think we were successful in finding locations, not successful in finding the structures because they no longer existed. So this has been quite a journey for you,
Yes.
I would say. And I would imagine that there's a few items in particular that really, you never even imagined that you would find, that you would learn. If you were to think of the top, whatever, 1, 2, 3 that you can think of the things that, when you're going to think, those are the first 3 things that pop into your mind about things you learned on this journey. What would those be?
Well, I think I started by thinking we didn't have anything, and I'm currently writing a book about my paternal grandparents and their village and their ancestors, and then their life in the United States, and as well as their childhood, respectively. The book is about 450 pages, so there was a lot more there than I imagined. In terms of specific surprises, my family had mentioned that when my grandmother went from they were under the impression that my grandmother had been evacuated from the orphanage in Sivas before the genocide, and that she went to Greece. And it turns out that no, she was there during the genocide. And then they said, oh, she was in Samsun, which is directly north of Sivas, a port city. And doing research, I found out that that was not a port of call, but indeed she was at another orphanage in Samsun run by Near East Relief, that was run by Adam Dildilyan, who is a professional photographer. We have these gorgeous pictures, portraits, group portraits of the orphans. I had assumed they were taken in Greece because I didn't even know about the orphanage in Samsun. But there was a lot of photographic and professionally taken photographs of a time when photography was new, that they were taking pictures of orphans at that time, just for me is remarkable, and that my grandmother was in there was amazing. And then to find out, reading Armin Marsubyan's book, he is the nephew of Adam Dildilyan, there was a lot of information about their menus, what the evacuation of the orphanage was in November of 1922, when there was the Greek and Turkish population exchanges, and all of the Armenian and Greek orphans had to leave Turkey. There was a lot of information about what their daily life in the orphanage was like, what their trip from Samsun to Greece was like. Like I said, menus, photographs, information about the vocational education that they got. So there was kind of this wealth of new chapter that I had no idea, that gave me a lot of insight into my grandmother's life.
Fascinating.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It's a wonderful project.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that it will resonate with a lot of people
I hope so.
that want to do similar things. Do you have tips for them that
Yeah.
you know, over time you've learned from your experiences that
Yeah.
can help them?
I think, I was lucky. I was the collector as each of my grandparents and older aunts and uncles passed away. They were like, what are we going to do with these books? What are we going to do with these photographs? What are we going to do with these documents? Oh, good, we'll give it to Meline. She'll, so I had a wealth of information just to start with, but again, not very much, like anybody else would have. When I was working at lunch, I would Google various things. I would Google their family names, the location. I would Google the name of the orphanage, and I would just print out whatever I got. And I was working. I was just too busy to write anything, but I put what I found in different folders, and then when I retired, kind of poured through it and really dug into a lot of the information.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Meline. It
Thank
really
you.
is a pleasure. And I hope that you found this useful in your own Armenian family history research. If you have a question for a future episode, please send it to HyeRoots@Hairenik.com.